the home violated this seventh commandment. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus took this seventh commandment to a whole different level, just like he did with the issue of murder. In Matthew 5, verses 27 and 28, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." In that statement, Jesus is warning us to guard our eyes and guard our minds and guard our hearts from anything that would in any way, shape, or form threaten the purity of our marriage relationship. This means steer clear of any flirtatious interaction with someone of the opposite sex. It means steer clear of pornography. It means to steer clear of long, lustful glances at members of the opposite sex. You see, Satan has placed sexually stimulating landmines everywhere, and you and I have to stay on guard constantly. You shall not commit adultery. The eighth commandment is about keeping your hands to yourself. Verse 15, you shall not steal. This commandment is very clear and it doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. In essence, this commandment is teaching us to respect the personal property of others. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. Keep your hands to yourself. This applies to everything from borrowing something from a neighbor or friend and never giving it back, to shoplifting in a store, to stealing someone's identity, to robbing a bank, and everything in between. None of us has the right to take something that doesn't belong to us. You shall not steal. How many of you remember the old Brock's candy displays in the stores? Remember in the grocery stores, the old 5 and dime stores? What were those things? That was a trap, wasn't it? I mean, think of how many honest citizens turned into thieves because of that Brock's candy display. You know, I think a lot of people interpreted it to mean that the store put that there so we can have free samples. And that way we'll buy more candy. But it wasn't free, was it? Every piece of candy that was taken and never paid for cost the store. Now, I'm just using that as an example, that we have to be very, very careful about rationalizing in our minds that we have the right to someone else's property when we don't. The ninth commandment is about protecting the good name of others. Verse 16 says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Each year we hear about hundreds of thousands of acres of timberland and countless homes being destroyed by wildfires out in the western part of our country. And almost every single time it seems like those devastating wildfires are caused by a single spark or a single cigarette butt that's been carelessly thrown down, or a single lightning strike, or a single untended campfire that was walked away from. And James 3 compares the tongue to a wildfire. How many lives have been hurt or destroyed by someone's loose and untamed tongue? This ninth commandment not only forbids us from giving false testimony against our neighbors, it also means do not gossip. Do not spread rumors. Do not be talebearers. Don't be party to any conversation that may cause harm or destruction to someone else's good name. Be very, very careful about those conversations. The 10th commandment is about being contented with what God has blessed you with. Verse 17, he says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Coveting means to have a strong desire to possess what belongs to another person. It means to burn with desire for someone else's material possessions. And just in case you're tempted to think that this issue of coveting is not really a big deal, Just remember that David coveted Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, and Uriah wound up dead because of it. And just remember, Ahab coveted Naboth's vineyard, and Naboth wound up dead so Ahab could take possession of his vineyard. So you see, coveting is a very, very serious issue. And so God forbids coveting because coveting leads to dissatisfaction with what God has blessed us with. That's what God wants us to be, be happy and contented with, is what He's given to us. Not wanting what He's given to somebody else. Coveting also leads us to depend on things for our happiness rather than upon God. Well, as we bring this message to a close, I want to leave you with this final thought about this great chapter of the Bible, Exodus 20. You know, some people argue that the Ten Commandments don't apply to today's Christian. And I beg to differ. I mean, do you think it's now okay to have other gods before you? Is it now okay to worship handmade or hand-carved images of God? Is it okay now to take God's name in vain or to neglect the Lord's Day? Just because we don't live under the old covenant, does that now make it okay to dishonor and disrespect our parents or to go out and commit murder, or commit adultery, or to steal what doesn't belong to us? You see, the answer's obvious, isn't it? The very spirit of the Ten Commandments is still just as binding on our lives today as it was the day the Lord gave those laws to Moses on Mount Sinai. Remember, I told you at the outset of the message, the essence of the Ten Commandments can be summarized in those two laws that Jesus said are the greatest. And that is that we love the Lord our God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and all of our mind. And that we love our neighbor as ourselves. And those two laws must govern our lives until our earthly journey is ended. We're going to sing our hymn of decision. Have thine